there are many reports. I dug through them yesterday with the viewers, you know, in the BBC, in the Guardian, and so on, about the Russians bombing the power grid, power stations, and water stations. There are now reports coming in that they've bombed a dam. You know, what I wanted to ask you is what's going on here? Number one, are these reports true? Number two, if they are true, wouldn't these be war crimes because it's public infrastructure, civilian infrastructure? What do you make of all these reports?
Well, A, it's true, and B, it's not a war crime. I'm sorry. I mean, I know purists are like, oh, that's civilian power. Well, no, it's actually military power.
How come?
It's power that's used to power up command and control centers. It's power that's used to power up trains.
Well, they were saying there's no more electricity in the streets, like where they're, you know, residents. So
well, you know, the Russians don't get. It's not like the Russians could come in and go. Let's say the Russians are one to knock off. Let's say I'm here at my computer, and what I'm doing right now is considered to be a legitimate military activity, and you want to shut me down. You can send somebody in to go down to my basement and start punching off switches on my, you know, my master control board. Or you can just send a missile and knock the whole damn thing out. The Russians don't have the ability to come in and say, we're going to turn off this power, this power, this power, but we're going to leave the lights on at home for the civilians. No, but look at what they did. They struck the power, and in doing so, they froze the front, literally froze the front. All that maneuvering that the Ukrainians were doing, they weren't doing anymore. They froze the front. But within 24 hours, much of that electrical capacity was back up and running. What does that mean? That means that the targeting was very sophisticated and very deliberate. I know a couple things about targeting electrical power grids. I can tell you when we targeted the Iraqi electric power grid, we knocked it the hell out. We hit the right stuff. We purposely said, you're being shut down. So in order to reconstitute it, you have to literally rebuild it. The Russians didn't do that. And the Russians know this power grid. The Russians know how it works. If they wanted to shut it down permanently, they would have. What they did is they hit the area that achieves the result, but allows it to be rebuilt quickly so power can be reconstituted. This means that the goals and objectives of the special military operation are very much in place, which is do minimal harm to civilian infrastructure. Minimal harm to civilian infrastructure. And right, here we're in an emergency situation.
Sorry to cut you off, Scott, but I just wanted to say that what they're saying in the Western media and the mainstream media is that this is purely and strictly civilian, right? And they're not mentioning or letting off that this is actually being used for military purposes, because the conventional wisdom and well, I would say the international law is that, you know, if a military unit or the armed forces take over and you know, they man something that is usually for civilians, like a hospital, for example, and they start firing from that hospital, then it becomes a legitimate target. So you're saying that, are you saying that they turned this into a legitimate target, a legitimate military target?
What I'm saying is that electricity is a legitimate military target under any circumstance. If a Ukrainian general hits a light switch and a light bulb comes on and allows him to read a report, that's a military target. You can't argue that electricity is for civilian use only. It's dual use. The military benefits from it. The Russians should have shut it down on day one, like we did in Iraq. It's not a war crime, but the Russians said we're not going to harm civilian infrastructure. The Russians have been playing above board from day one. I know the West will never give them credit, but the fact is, you know, the Russians have been coming in with a very soft approach. Even this approach, which was an emergency situation. Understand that a lot of people are saying this was punitive in nature. No, it wasn't. It was an emergency situation where the Russians had to carry out strategic strikes against the electrical infrastructure of the areas that impact the front immediately. You know, if this was shutting down the entire power grid, how come Kiev still had power? How come Lvov still had power? How come the cities in the West still had power? The only cities that lost power were the cities involved in the immediate activity related to the front. So that's that. Now, so in Kharkiv, the other thing they did, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, again, reminding the viewers that this is mostly in Kharkiv where the electricity was out. And what about the water in the dams? Does that count as well?
Here we come to that, because So the Russians take out the electrical grid and they slow the Ukrainians down. And this again buys Russia time now to get their defenses in order. And that was the purpose of it. All they need to do is buy 24 to 48 hours so that the guys that were on the run out of Kharkiv, who are now on the Oxel River, can actually dig in, get their overhead cover in place, because Ukrainians have a lot of artillery, and get their ammunition put in properly, get it dispersed properly, camouflaged properly, get the defense set up. You need time. You need some breathing space because these guys are getting the crap beat out of them by the Ukrainians who are just pushing them and pursuing them. So you buy time by shutting the grid off, freezing the Ukrainians in place. But look again, if the Russians wanted to shut down power forever, they would have. Power's back up. The people got their water. The people got their electricity. The people aren't suffering at all. So, and think about the number of civilian casualties. I think you can count them on one hand. It's always tragic when a civilian dies, but believe me, if this was a punitive attack against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, the Russians could have done it in a way that killed a lot more people. This was very responsible, specific, military-oriented targeting undertaken by the Russians. Now, the dam. Here you have a situation where the Ukrainians are building up a big force that's preparing to strike against the Russian defenses in the vicinity of Zaporizhia, I believe, in that area. Kiroy Rog is the city. You have a river coming through. Over time, the Ukrainians, together with their NATO allies, I think the British had a big role. They put in a whole bunch of bridges over this river, and they're pontoon bridges. And the Ukrainians can freely supply these forces, move their forces back and forth. And this is a problem for the Russians because, again, they're in a very fluid situation. They're trying to settle their defense, but they've shifted their reserves. So there's a lot of movement taking place on the part of Russia while they try and get this in. And the last thing you need while they have this fluidity is for the Ukrainians to come in and hit a place that might not be perfectly defended. So what do the Russians do? They take out this dam. Now, they took it out in a controlled way. This wasn't the Jamestown or Johnstown Dam in Pennsylvania where it blew up, a wall of water comes down, wipes out towns, people get washed away, 10, 20,000 dead. This was, boom, a breach, water coming through, and gradually flooding the city of Kiroy Rog. And they flooded it, and that was a major logistical place, command and control, and it's flooded. Not too much command and control taking place in a flooded city. But the other thing it did is it raised the level and the speed of the water in the river, and all those bridges were washed away. They are no more. They're gone. До свидания. Have a good day.